Here we are. Here we are, Anthony Smith. It's a little bit different look this week on Freightonomics, where we discuss the combination of the freight market and the economy, isn't it?
Very different. And I can't start this podcast without first thanking our crew, Crystal Lugo, Cody Mathis, and the entire team, just really putting something special together for us for being able to work remotely here.
Yeah, this is definitely a sign of the times. Working remotely, getting to do our podcast remotely from our houses and apartments here
That's
in
right.
Chattanooga, Tennessee. So, you know, 2021 has started off with exactly where 2020 left off. Everything seems to be in the exact same spot that we left it. We thought we were going to turn the calendar over and get a new start, a new lease on the on life, but yet here we are. I guess this time last week, the Capitol was getting stormed during our show, Anthony.
That's right. So I almost felt bad, but like as soon as we left the show, we saw the news, like everything is getting stormed in the Capitol. And it's just like, dang, we should have been talking about this on the podcast. But last week we did do a overview of what's happening in the economy or what the outlook is for 2021, since 2020 was such an eventful year. Of course, we're going to need an outlook expectations. That doesn't negate our responsibility to talk about what we expect to happen in the economy. And so this is going to be kind of like an offshoot or a continuation of that. We said what the outlook is, and now this week is kind of like a continuation of that, of what really matters most in the economy, especially as we navigate through chaos.
Yeah, I think that's well said because, even though we can make our predictions now, this situation is going to evolve throughout the year. We couldn't have predicted. Nobody predicted what was happening in 2020 with any accuracy, including myself. But you have to be mindful of what's going on in the environment around you. Obviously, we have a data platform that helps us do that here at FreightWaves. And, what we've seen so far is, not as much turbulence in the freight market. But that being said, we do anticipate some transitions coming up here in the near future. Now, we talked about how certain segments of the economy were going to recover in different waves. We were going to have, the housing market, for instance, your specialty continues to be strong throughout the year. And that's been a big bellwether for what we've seen in the freight market because a lot of the downstream impacts that it has on freight transportation. The home improvement projects continue. Looking at some of the Bank of America consumer spending data that I looked at just this past week, an interesting aspect of this is that I noticed consumers actually spent slightly less in December versus November in some of these preliminary reports. And even though it was a record e-commerce situation, a still booming holiday season, people seem to quiet down a little bit in December, but continue along the same spending patterns that they had through most of 2020. So we really haven't seen a big paradigm shift just yet. We still have cases obviously going through the roof. People are still sheltering in place, and we just haven't seen any signs that things are going to change anytime soon, right?
That's it. And I think really with that retail section, especially, it was really within our expectations. We saw some easing, some slowing within the overall retail spending, but we did see those areas of opportunity. And that's also some of the areas that we're going to talk about throughout the show today is areas of opportunity. And so we see e-commerce continue to perform very strongly, very robust. Building product materials, as you touched on, we're going to look at it, housing. Existing home sales are still having very tight inventories. And we're looking at these tight inventories as we saw throughout 2020. People are staying at home. Those that own homes are getting into those home projects that haven't been completed just yet, and they're completing them. They're staying active. They're staying busy that way. Also, one other thing, if you see me looking over here, I am going to be looking at LinkedIn as always. So if you are looking to get involved in the conversation, you can always still chime in. I am following that chat here closely. We have Tim Dooner. What an honor to have him watching right now, saying, looking good, remote boys. So just trying to follow Tim Dooner's lead as he led the charge on the remote podcasting movement here at FreightWaves. But as always, feel free to chime in at any time.
Yeah, that's right. So, Mark Solomon actually wrote an article along the lines of what we were talking about with what was happening in December and around the holiday shipping. Everybody was expecting this record holiday boom. We did have it, but it wasn't to the extent I think that a lot of people thought it may happen. He writes, Shipmageddon averted. It wasn't a bad holiday delivery season. Now, this is obviously centered around a lot of the delivery. So the parcel carriers like UPS, FedEx, they did not suffer a lot of service failures as they thought that people would. There were still, several packages that didn't make it in time for Christmas delivery, but it did not take away as much as they thought it might do for the holiday season. That's a fantastic article that really kind of, I think we've kind of adjusted to this way of life, the e-commerce ordering, and I think that that blended itself very well into our holiday shipping season. So whereas in previous years we, typically are everybody rushes to Amazon or some sort of online ordering service around Thanksgiving, and they get it all done right around then with the Black Fridays and all that. But we saw it earlier. We talked about this in October. We had Prime Day in October that somewhat mitigated, I think, this last second surging. And it also allowed a lot of these shippers and companies to really get in front of that wave of holiday shipping. So in a way, and correct me if I'm wrong, Anthony, but COVID might have inspired a little bit improvement on the holiday shipping situation.
Exactly. And so when we're looking at some of the things that kind of came from COVID, it wasn't just um, some of these shutdowns throughout the country, but really, it really forced a few things. One of those things really being inefficiency, because it exposed a lot within the supply chain and really throughout business and commerce overall. When we're looking at what some of the impacts are, it exposed some things and it amplified some other things. So we're looking at things that got amplified. If a business was already in bad position, really kind of going maybe week to week or month to month, just barely getting by, things got amplified during COVID-19. Even if they were able to get some kind of protection relief, they weren't really able to stay in business overall. And so it really kind of exposed inefficiencies within the marketplace and exposed inefficiencies within different personal businesses or just in everyday life. And so that's really kind of part of what some of the shows touch on is what what do we do in the time of chaos? I mean, I think we're looking at overall COVID-19. A lot of people throughout 2020 are just going to say, I know in these uncertain times, we just got to sit and wait and see. And really, when we're looking at this right now, waiting and seeing isn't going to be the best move for a lot of people. I mean, if you're just going to sit there and wait, innovation is going to pass you by, life's going to pass you by, opportunities are going to pass you by, and this is just going to turn into a story from 10 years from now, because we still hear stories now, when the Great Recession hit, lost everything, things were rough, yes, things were rough, but how did you react? And so, spoiler alert to the title and the theme of the show, what really matters most is you and what you do and how you react into these
Thank you.
times of
It's
uncertainty.
I'm so glad that you finally admitted that, like right here on the show, that everybody can see that what matters most is me. But in all seriousness, I guess the theme of the show, yeah, things didn't change dramatically here in the fourth quarter like we thought they might have shown off. Now we didn't really, we at FreightWaves really didn't expect, some sort of massive disruption on the scale that we saw in March of last year. But we did expect a little bit of a change or a shift after the holidays. And so far, we haven't seen that. Now, that doesn't mean we're just going to sit back and just say, okay, we're in the new normal by any means. And I think that's the point of today's discussion is when can you start to sit back and think, oh, now this is the new normal? Well, if you remember 2018, the freight market there, anybody involved in transportation was like, this is the new normal. This is the demand was going crazy. Capacity was super tight. Not 4 or 5 months later, everything was back to, if not a little bit softer than it was before the capacity crunch in 2017, 2018 hit. And you saw spot market rates jump up 30, 40% and stay elevated throughout the winter. We still have spot market rates up over $3 a mile in a lot of places that aren't accustomed to that, according to truckstop.com. So it's, things have softened a little bit. Capacity has come down or I said loosened a little bit. I mean, but it hasn't softened significantly. We're still up around 22% tender rejection rates right now. And this is on the heels of a period where we've been averaging about 24, 25% over the last 4 to 5 months. So inevitably what this means with elevated spot market rates and demand has not really slackened that significantly. We're running roughly about 6% on average below where we were pre-Thanksgiving. So that period between Labor Day and Thanksgiving, we saw tender volumes extremely elevated. Accepted tender volumes, I should say, the thing that we use to kind of measure, pure loads moving throughout the United States were down 6% since then. So we're still moving a lot of freight. This is still way above where we were in 2019, way above the traditional January in terms of tender rejection rates. Um, and that's going to change, though. The real question is, when is it going to change? And I think one of the definitive answers of that question right now has been it's not going to change throughout the first quarter. Do you have any reason to think that that's an inaccurate statement?
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't think a lot's going to change throughout the first quarter. I mean, we're really seeing a continuation of what was going on throughout 2020, not just news items, but really throughout many of the economic movements. One of the things that's really concerning, um, and my point of view from the economic standpoint, is going to be employment. Employment has been rough. Consumers are really, really having a hard time at it. When you're looking at some of these employment numbers, jobless claims are still coming in. It's been very stubbornly above that 700,000 mark on those initial jobless claims week after week after week, sometimes even going up to the 800,000. So different outlets really kind of reporting all the same thing, that there's really being a big impact, a huge demand for labor by the consumer side. So people want to work, people are ready to work. But the other thing is permanent job loss. There's a lot of permanent job loss within the market. And so that's going to be another area of what really matters most. I mean, when you're looking around 5, 10, 15 years from now, is your entire, career going to be offset because you weren't able to adjust in this time of turmoil, where you were not able to adjust in this times of uncertainty? And that's really going to be a huge thing for many people. We're looking at airlines, we're looking at hospitality, when you're looking at restaurants, we're looking at different in-person services. How are you able to innovate and really kind of get back on the on course in the midst of all this chaos? And so really throughout the first quarter, I don't see a lot changing, especially from the marketplace. Of course, when we're looking at this, the uncertain thing is going to always be that virus and how the trajectory that it takes. But really, the rollout for the vaccine, if case levels really kind of continue to rise as we kind of move throughout the year, those are going to be the things that really kind of hinder overall economic trajectory. But really, what doesn't really matter how the government responds or how different industries respond, is how you respond to your particular industry.
Yeah, and I think we've seen with the vaccine rollout that has been not a bright spot of the overall 2021 nonsense so far. It's been very difficult for, I think, a lot of at the local level. They're having a lot of challenges distributing the vaccine, getting it to the right places. And again, we have an expiration date on this thing, so you can't just let it sit there and wait on everybody to come through. You have all sorts of infrastructure problems going on there. And even if we were to be able to distribute this effectively, you're talking a 30-day minimum on whether or not, getting true, resistance to the COVID-19 virus. So you can't sit back and wait on the vaccine to take hold. There's going to have to be other factors involved. You have to understand that, the world we live in now is going to be a little bit different when we come out of this virus as well. So some of the sticking points that I think are going to remain that we can kind of rely on, Anthony, and again, jump in here and disagree with me where you see fit. I think the e-commerce section, we are going to see, obviously slowing of growth in that realm. We can't grow at 30% indefinitely. I mean, I guess we could, but then that would be uh, probably more of a significant sign of disaster or looming disaster than
Yeah,
ever if we were to see that.
2003, China said, "Hold my beer."
Yeah, but I think some level of e-commerce is going to remain. So I think that supply chains are going to start to evolve faster. They were already doing that back in 2016, 2017. Amazon really has changed the landscape of shipping and distribution and warehousing. And we have Dr. Zach Rogers on intermittently to discuss some of those changes. But I think we're going to see an acceleration of that. And I think we're getting asked at FreightWaves more than ever about where to position warehouses and DCs, and how do we use some of this transportation data to more effectively position ourselves to where we're not bogged down by transportation bottlenecks like we've seen in the maritime space for the last year and a half, really. But these port clogs at the Los Angeles, Long Beach. I was talking to a few people the other day about why don't people use the Port of Tacoma more. It's underutilized resource, and also if you know anything about trucking, you get super cheap rates. You get a discount moving almost, it's probably 60 to 70% of the cost of moving out of Los Angeles to get it across the country. You have access to rail, all sorts of things up there that people just aren't utilizing. And I'm like, well, nobody built out any infrastructure up there. A lot of the shippers, aggregated in the exact same spots around the country. So you have places like Los Angeles. You go to City of Industry, and it's basically just it's an ocean of distribution centers sitting in the one on top of each other. You've got all the biggest shippers in the country, basically gobbling up all the capacity. So it almost creates a logjam with each other because they've gone out and built their infrastructure right on top of each other. And that's why we have such significant freight flow imbalance in our country right now, as all this freight's coming in from China. We've got 30 ships anchored out at sea, still coming through these two ports. Again, it has the biggest capacity of any of the ports in the United States, but there's room at other places right now. And I think that some of these supply chains are going to start to aggregate or move towards some of these a little bit better markets, if you will. That way they're not necessarily competing for capacity with a lot of things.
So Zach, is this any way similar to what we saw last year, or I guess 2 years ago now, when East Coast was getting a little bit more popular?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. They were already doing it. Now, the problem with doing it right now is because they are, obviously trying to keep up or just catch up from last year. The backlogs are still tremendous with all this freight. Now, something interesting to note, and this is a change that's occurred this year as we change the calendar. Los Angeles, the Long Beach, Los Angeles, the Southern California markets in trucking at least have softened significantly. We've seen tender rejection rates drop from 24 to all the way back down to about 15, 16% in that area. So we haven't seen a dramatic drop in volumes, but we have seen capacity situation change dramatically. So spot rates starting to come down out of there. We also have rail presence there. Shippers are a lot more, they tend to use the rails a little bit more in January than they do trucking when they, in terms of just surface freight mix, because service doesn't become as big of an issue. And, a few of these factors, obviously, combined with the fact that they don't need the service requirement that they needed in November in order to get the freight delivered in time for Christmas and the holidays. January, not as much of a sense of urgency outside of the fact that warehouses and distribution centers on the coast need to get emptied to allow for more freight to come into the country. And then they need to build these inventories back up. Now, I know our inventory to sales ratios a little bit out of date at this point, but they're still hovering around 1.3 months of inventory, which is significantly below what we were seeing in 2018, 2019, right?
That's right. And just kind of jumping real quickly here, almost forgot about the LinkedIn comment section for a moment, but we have Rhonda in there saying, love the blue swag, Anthony Smith. So Rhonda, if you didn't know, we have a swag store. We have an online store, so you can get any of the stuff that you see here. Bonnie M. Scott throwing a hardball question at me right now saying, touch on the 140,000 jobs lost by women. And you know
Man,
what? I
throw in
think
some
I have.
heaters.
All right. And so I think so when you look at economics, it is a social science. So I think I have to bring out some of the more social aspects into this. Um, Off the top of my head, thinking about some of these things, usually when we're looking at the job place, just from anecdotal stories and studies I've seen, and again, part of the entire theme of 2021 is going to be a lot of reinventing yourself. It's going to be a lot of innovation, and not just innovation from the industry and business, but innovation of yourself. And so I think one of the things, and just talking from individual women in the workforce, sometimes when, coming out of the college world, even then applying at different jobs. I think a lot of times just looking at the way a lot of more men go into the workforce, they're looking at just long shots. They'll apply to anything and everything. When a lot of women I've met in the past that are going to the workforce really kind of go over each and every single skill set and then start to think, I'm not qualified in this area, I'm not qualified in that area. And I'm just saying, go for it. Go for anything and everything. If you feel like you're underqualified, go for it anyway. And so my advice for and just kind of talking to some of those women that are out of the workforce right now that have been laid off or unemployed and can't find work, this is the time to innovate yourself, reinvent yourself. And if you think you don't have the right skill sets, get as many of those skill sets as possible, learn them as you go on, and don't be afraid of just applying for anything that you might feel that, you know what, maybe I'm not ready for this. Apply. I bet you are ready for it. You just are, maybe you aren't quite getting into some of the areas that you are confident of getting into just yet. But I think when we're looking at that standpoint, that could be an area of opportunity. Of course, it's a lot easier said than done. But I think when we're looking at 2021, this is the time to reinvent yourself, not just from a business standpoint, but from a personal standpoint in every opportunity in every area.
Now, Anthony, I can actually, I've got a little bit to add to this. So some of the stuff, and again, you're going to have to shore up my stats here, but some of the stuff that we've seen with employment, and especially the recovery in the employment over the last several months, has been obviously disproportionate to each other. We've got the service side still losing jobs, and that's where the majority of the job losses have come from. The restaurants, the airline industries, et cetera, travel and leisure have all significantly lost a lot of employment level here over the last several months, and they continue to do so, especially as some of the cases rise. And one of the sectors that obviously we work in, the transportation and warehousing sector, as well as the manufacturing sector, surprisingly now is starting to add jobs back, and that has been the majority, like they've talked about with the K-shaped recovery, we've, here in the transportation space have had a much different experience than those in the service industry side. And I think, having worked in trucking most of my life, you go into any of these companies and it is a very male dominated environment. Transportation and warehousing are very, and unequal in terms of the types of, the sex in the office. So and I'm not going to speak to the societal norms. You definitely have more female presence in the service side, probably because they're much easier to deal with and people want to work with them rather than a guy that nobody really wants to deal with that much. And I think it's just in their nature. They're a lot more approachable, easy to talk to. They communicate much better on average in general. So it's, this uneven recovery in the economy has really favored some of that back to what, really before COVID was kind of this is kind of grassroots bottom rung industries where the warehousing and the durable goods manufacturing that really have been kind of under the radar for a while have really had their moment in the sun for the moment. And I think that will change. I mean, obviously, once this, the virus and the pandemic starts to subside, I think we're going to see the summer of all summers. I think everybody's going to go back outside. They're going to hop on planes. They're going to go out to eat every single night of the week. I think, you see it in the northern tiers. So I would think that here in, in the next few months, we're going to see a dramatic change in that environment. And subsequently, that means that the transportation warehousing and the durable goods well, actually, I'm going to leave the durable goods side out of this because I think they got a long way to grow still because they were largely absent from the 2020 recovery. But I think that some of that is going to eat into that disposable income for that, the transportation that's moving these durable goods. To what extent, I don't think it's going to be a lot. I think people are going to do both, but they're certainly not going to be sitting in their houses as much, looking at those new, that project that they've got to finish, the new stairs that they've got to cover here in the next bit. But certainly less of that will probably occur once everybody gets the go ahead to leave their houses. Do you think that's pretty accurate statement, Anthony.
Definitely. And I think really kind of talking to one of your points is different industries, and the industry that we work in, transportation, no secret about it, is very male dominated. And I think when we look at other industries, there are tons of opportunity for women. And I would love to see more women within transportation. Adding on, Bonnie's M. Scott says she owns a freight brokerage and is actively hiring right now. She said she had to be innovative in 2020 and started purchasing for cities and other municipalities. And now she's selling goods historically moved for those municipalities. So that's just an example of kind of being innovative and reinventing yourself. And a woman that's involved in an industry that's typically not seeing a lot of females within that workforce. And so I think if you have that engineering degree, get after it. If you're not already getting after it within the engineering world, computer science, anything tech related, anything, any kind of vocationals, welding, anything and everything. Just getting after it, and not really kind of really being afraid of not being qualified or not, because I guarantee you are more than qualified. But that would just be some of the advice that I would say for anyone that's really kind of been impacted for some of these pandemic driven job losses, especially within the service side. But yeah, congrats to Bonnie, and really being able to innovate throughout the year into 2020 and now getting into 2021. But definitely agree with you, and just looking at some of those demographics within different types of service industries and different types of backgrounds.
Yeah, and I think that's, if nothing else that we've learned this year, it's adaptability. You need to be able to be adaptable. We've kind of, over the last, pre-COVID years, we have not had a lot of volatility in our economy at that. I mean, outside of the Great Depression, 2008, 2009, 2016 was a little bit of a slowdown. We've seen more uneven economic growth and decline here in the last 3 years than we did the previous 30. Outside of that one little spat there in 2008, 2009. And that was kind of a traditional recession, was it not? I mean, we saw things, fall apart because the housing markets collapsed, the financial institutions, were at the heart of most of that. But it was, even though it was very volatile, it was also somewhat predictable. I mean, if you've ever seen the movie The Big Short, people were able to actually see that one coming for years. Even George W. Bush, the former president, called it out as being a possibility before it even happened. So this is one of those situations that is unlike the others. It is a great unforeseen, even though you can go back and say, oh yeah, we know there's a pandemic that's going to occur. Statistically, it happens every so often, da 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 da. But it doesn't happen in modern times. That's the difference. A recession still happen in modern times. People have been calling for them every year since I've been in the workforce. And not everybody's calling for a pandemic every single year. And certainly, hopefully, this is the last one that we see in our lifetime. But on that point, adaptability, making sure that you are prepared to at least be able to have some sort of fungibility in your environment and your supply chains and your networks. Transportation providers, I mean, you guys know that with the elevated spot market and these rates where they are for as long as they've been, there's going to be a lot of extra cash sitting around eventually, and we're seeing those Class 8 orders jump up. And I addressed this week in the chart of the week, talking about it. So it's really about getting in front of what's happening next, when it's going to occur. Certain things are going to occur. You don't know when, but you still need to get in front of them.
That's right. And I think we're on our last minute here, just kind of getting out, and time just kind of flew by. So I think soon, not yet, but soon we're going to be moving out into that 1 hour block. But just kind of to piggyback off of what you said, it's really what you do. How do you adjust? How do you adapt? And how do you really kind of innovate in this time of uncertainty? Don't wait around for any kind of government assistance. Don't wait around to see how things turn out. Just go after it and get it done. Don't be sitting here 5, 10 years from now saying, oh, well, the pandemic hit and things weren't the same. Things weren't the same because make it because you acted in such a way that you really kind of catapulted your future in some ways that you've never seen possible before. But really, what matters most is what you do and how you handle the situation. Control what you can.
There you go. And that'll do it for today's show. Of course, thank you as always for tuning in to the Freightonomics podcast, and download the FreightWaves TV app on podcast players everywhere. Just look up Freightonomics or Freightcasts and get all of our other enjoyable podcasts as well. Well done, Mr.
And
Smith.
drink more water.
I